Hey, what's up, listeners? Guys, if you have not heard about Anchor, it's time you get on this app. It's the easiest way to make a podcast in 2020. If you haven't heard about it, let me tell you, it's 100% free. It's unlimited hosting. If you've been sitting on your butt trying to make a podcast and you haven't yet, because you're like, oh, it's so much money. I don't know what I should talk about. There's so many things to figure out. Anchor says, hey, shut up. I've got you covered. Anchor's kind of aggressive like that. But no, their Anchor holds it down. It's 100% free. Anchor will distribute your podcasts to Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever your favorite platform is to listen to podcasts. Anchor will do it for you. No questions asked. No questions asked. They're cool like that, guys. So they have so many creation tools that you can use to edit your podcast right from your phone or computer. And you can start to make money with no minimum listenership, like some of those folks. They want you to have like 1,000 listeners. Let me tell you, we got like 5 crucial listeners that the Duck Legs podcast has. And Anchor's like, okay, we can still have some sponsors on there. But seriously though, Anchor is awesome. We use Anchor for our hosting, and it really has everything you need to make your podcast in one place. So download the free Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started today. Download that free Anchor app. It's free. Or if you don't like phones, if you're one of those people that live in a log cabin, but still somehow have Wi-Fi in a computer, go to anchor.fm to get started. We'll see you in the episode. Thank you.
Uchenna music. We like this style.
It's kind of one of those things. It's like the duck. You know, you see a duck in the water, right? The duck looks like it's cool, but the duck's freaking working hard under the water. Wow, working hard. That's how our place is. We look cool, but we're working hard.
Can we bring up Bourbon Tales? Because I thought that's what we were doing.
Oh my goodness!
Are we not?
Can I refill my cocktail?
Yeah, go, please.
I mean, I know we're recording. I'm so sorry.
Jared's great at editing.
Yeah, that's good.
I had a bourbon before this. It's a long day. I'm not an alcoholic, but I'm a grown-ass woman.
This is a safe place. It's okay.
I'm a grown-ass woman. Let me just get a cocktail. I'll be right back.
Take your time.
I'll be right back.
We'll fill the air.
Fill the air.
I didn't mean to throw that curveball in there. I thought
that's
that's
great.
what we were doing.
What are you drinking, Chase?
This is actually Cedar Ridge from Iowa. It's the first bottle that Whiskey Doc's got for free. So he sent it down to us.
There you go. Yeah, we'll have to fill. Sorry.
He gave me and Dylan both a bottle. So it was actually pretty cool.
There you go. We'll have to fill UC in on that. On Whiskey Docs.
We still have to schedule something where we collab. We haven't done that yet. That seemed like an easy go-to. I think we've been podcasting for over a year now and still haven't done anything with Duck Legs.
Yeah, we'll have to do that for sure.
Okay, I am ready.
There we go.
Tyler's unmute.
Oh, Tyler's muted. We can't.
Hey, this is my first time ever working Zoom. So I have no beverage, alcoholic or non-alcoholic, but I will get water if I need to.
Yeah. Go put a lime in it or something. Make yourself feel good, you know?
Yeah, lemon, a little spritz.
It's a virgin cocktail then. You're good.
There you go.
And so, Dr. UC, before we get started, Trace is actually a host of another podcast called Whiskey Docs as well.
So we'll have to get you on there. I didn't know you did Bourbon Tales, so I started creeping you on Instagram today.
Yeah.
So that'll have to be a thing.
Will it right now?
Oh, nice.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
I got a bourbon from Iowa. I was just saying one of our last guests, he sent us a bottle, so that's what I'm sipping on right now. Cedar Ridge.
Nice. Okay. Is it it's bourbon you said? Not
yeah. Mm-hmm. It's a bourbon.
Nice.
That's why you started the podcast, just to get free liquor, right?
Pretty
bourbon.
much.
Hey man. That's a bonus side effect. I like that.
Well, Dr. UC, as we get this stuff rolling here, and how do you prefer? You prefer Dr. UC? Do you prefer? How do you pronounce your first name? I'm not gonna.
Well,
I'm gonna let you say that.
I'm very Nigerian, so I have a very Nigerian name. It's Uchenna, like Uchenna. But everyone calls me UC. Everyone. My parents call me UC. Like, I only get Uchenna when they're really unhappy with me.
Yikes. Yeah.
And I'm so grown, and I get that every once in a while.
So that's a childhood nickname, right?
It's a childhood, yeah. It was out of necessity because I went in kindergarten. My teacher, Mrs. K, she told my father that the kids were having a hard time pronouncing my name, and my dad was like, "Well, just call her UC," because my full name is Uchenna Cynthia Ossai. But so my dad's like, "Just take UC, and then or the first 2 letters of my name, whatever works," and it stuck.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Where were you born?
I was born and raised in Dallas. And then I left as soon as my feet could carry me after high school. And yeah.
Didn't like Dallas at all?
No.
Okay.
I don't want to throw shade to Dallas. Dallas is a special place, and it has its special ways. Yeah. I just wanted an experience that would stretch me, that would make me uncomfortable. So I knew that I wanted to go to the East Coast because I knew they had a physical therapy program, and I can tell you all about how that ended up. And so I went to Boston University, which was the best decision I ever made.
Yeah, awesome. And yeah, I think it's about 2 years ago, Tyler and I were in New Orleans for a CSM, maybe 3 years ago now, dang. And we ran into Dr. Sandy Hilton, who I'm sure you've met and hung out with.
My girl, yes.
And we were talking, and she was like, "Oh my God, you follow UC Logic, right?" And I was like, "Who? What's this? Who's that?" And ever since then, I've been the biggest fan, especially as a fellow Austinite right now.
Oh man.
So, yeah, I've just been loving all the content ever since.
Thank you.
For sure.
Thank you.
How would we'll let you kind of give yourself your own introduction as we're learning more about here.
So I guess first and foremost, I'm a pelvic health physical therapist, and I'm assistant professor at University of Texas Dell Medical School in the Department of Women's Health. But I'm also manager of the pelvic health program for UT Health Austin, so the clinical arm of the med school. And I am adjunct faculty at the University of Michigan in their School of Social Work for their sexual health certification program. And lastly, I am founder of UC Logic, which is a sex education platform, online sex education platform that's really focused on adults and improving their sexual intelligence and affirming their sexuality.
That's one thing we get we do that really well in America is sex education, right?
Oh, we do it so good. No, it's out of line how bad it is. Out of line. Like
I like how you could only hold that bit for like a minute or like a second, and then it was like, no, it's atrocious. I can't even joke about it.
It's like ridiculous. It's ridiculous.
When you went into PT, did you go into PT school thinking, I want to do something in the sex education space as well? Or the
I went to PT school only to do pelvic health. It was really just, that's what got me. I didn't know much about physical therapy, but I did an internship when I was with Kathy Tisco, Park Cities Physical Therapy in Dallas. I was 15 and I was her little intern for the summer. And I honestly thought it was like a sports clinic because I played soccer. And it ended up being a pelvic health clinic. And I was like, oh snap. And I told my mom was like, how was it? Well, she's Nigerian. So she's like, oh darling, how was it? How was it nice? Was it wonderful? And I was like, mommy, I saw a couple of penises and a lot of vaginas. And she's like, well, people have genitals and you need to understand how they work. So continue commitment.
Yes.
And I did. And you know what? Kathy is the reason why I'm here today. So I will be forever grateful to her for her mentorship and her allowing this 15-year-old drip-nosed child be her PT tech.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
And I was about to say, what a sex positive comment too from your mom.
Oh well. Yeah. my mom, the little African, that's what my sister and I call her. She's tiny but mighty, and she was our first sex educator. Like, she was that crunk mother when you were like 8 or 9, and she's like, okay, these are your genitals, you know, and they look like all of this. There are all these pictures of your genitals, and you know, we were born in, my sister and I are Catholic, or we were raised Catholic. And so my mom was like, you know, don't have sex until marriage, but if you do have sex, it should be pleasurable. And if you know, but don't do it, you know. Like, it was very confusing, you know, like she's a chemist and she's like scientist, but she's also crazy Catholic. And not that Catholics are crazy, but my mom she goes to church like 3 times a week. So, you know, so it was really interesting growing up. So my sister and I basically grew up confused, but clear that we had autonomy over our bodies, and that pleasure wasn't bad, and you know, we could still be who we are, and that was okay. Being sexual was okay.
Yeah. Do you think we're doing a better job as a society confusing kids less about sex and
No.
who they are? Okay.
No.
Dang, I was hoping for some positive, like some upward trend.
I think that I think that people are accessing knowledge about sex more now, but people have to work through the fact that sex is not just, you know, it's deeper than the acts of sex. Sex is your beliefs, how you were raised. You know, it is your race influences your sex, your sexuality, your religion, you know, your health. Everything influences your beliefs in sex and your body, you know, and I think that people don't get that message soon enough. And as a pelvic health physical therapist, I see a lot of patients come in where they say, oh, I'm peeing my pants, I'm doing this. And they say, well, you know, I'm like, well, how is your orgasm function? And they're like, what are you talking about? I'm like, well, are you able to achieve orgasms? They're like, no, I've never achieved an orgasm. I'm like, okay, is that distressing to you? They're like, what do you mean? I'm like, does it bother you? And they're like, well, yeah, but what can I do about that? And for me, I'm just thinking, wow, you know, that, and I'm not saying an orgasm is a measure of a good sex life, not at all. But I think people deprioritize their sexual health because they don't think it's as valid as their cardiac health or anything. And people who have any type of sexual dysfunction do not view themselves as healthy people. They could have perfect, you know, hemoglobin A1C, their blood pressure is perfect, everything. But if they are having a little bit of sexual dysfunction, they don't view themselves as healthy. And that's something we all need to really think about and consider. Yeah.
For sure.
I'm gonna jump off my soapbox.
No, please. This is what it's about. It's all soapbox. It's all soapbox today. And I'm sorry, I'm blanking on the sex education degree that you have. What is that called again? I'm sorry, I can't remember.
No, I it's actually not a degree. I actually took the University of Michigan Sexual Health Certification Program. And honestly, I can't remember. I think it was either 4 years ago, or I think I finished 4 years ago, maybe. I think I was 6 years into being a PT. And I realized, you know, I saw the program actually a few years before I even applied. Like I was kind of lusting at it from afar, but I felt like I needed to have more experience in the clinic with my patients to see, like, is this something that I really wanted to invest my money and a year of my time in doing and participating in. And so I finally jumped into it, and all I wanted to learn was the didactics. Like, what do I need to learn about sex? I wanted to know the basics. I wanted to know about, you know, sexual health across the gender spectrum. You know, I wanted to learn how to interview my patients in terms of their sexual issues. I wanted to understand what resources were out there. I wanted to understand what mental health, what sex therapists actually did. You know, I wanted to learn. And I had done a residency. You know, I did a pelvic health residency at WashU, and they were amazing, and I learned so much. But there wasn't this type of structured didactic circled around sexual health. And so I took the program simply to just get information. I didn't really care about I really didn't care about certifications, because in the physical therapy world, no one had, we had Tali Rosenbaum, who is in Israel, and she was a physical therapist turned psychotherapist. But we didn't have a ton of people with this. So I didn't see for me, when I took the class or the course, I didn't see the value in it. But then the director, Sally Foley, she said, we don't have PTs with a ton of PTs with this certification in sexuality counseling. You should really look into getting your certification. I was like, I don't know, Sally. I'm not trying to do anything crazy. I just wanted to get this information. And so, of course, she talked me into it, and I did it. And I turned it into my practice. So I feel like I can give my patients a totally different level of care and at least affirmation in what they're experiencing, especially when it comes to their sex lives.
So is like sexual physical therapy, is there like exercises, or is it more education, reassurance? Is it like the typical PT thought process of like you're going to give them a HEP? Like, what is like a plan of care, I guess, look for a sexual physical therapist?
Sure. And the thing is, everyone can be a sexual physical therapist. It just depends on, how your comfort level in addressing it. And so for me in that space, so part of my intake, so my evaluation, we ask, and as a pelvic PT, I'm already in a very protected space to do this, right? If you're an ortho PT, it's a little different. I'm in a closed room where it's just the two of us, or the three of us if they bring their partner, talking about very personal things. So I have the luxury of saying, asking about their poop, their pee. So when you're already asking people about their poop and their pee, asking them about sex is not a big leap. And so, I ask them, I have a detailed history. And so if they have pain or trauma or body image issues, let's say that the validated outcome measures for depression was high and anxiety was high, right? And so, but I also gave them a validated outcome measure for sexual function. And it's like their genital body image is in the toilet. So if you think your penis or your vulva is like gross and ugly, your sexy swagger is going to be off. So it might be, I'm going to give them maybe pelvic floor exercises to address their incontinence or their, fecal or urinary, or I might work on self manual therapy techniques to help address their pelvic pain. But then I might also say, let's talk about your value. Let's talk about your genitals. Why do you think your genitals are ugly? Where does that come from? I want you to investigate that and think about, how does that impact your pain? How does that impact your ability to connect with your pelvic floor? Because you have a huge disconnect. So think about that. Let's wrap that into their HEP and see. And it's not like I'm saying, I'm not doing deep dive psychotherapy. I just want them to understand the connections and that all of that is relevant. And so for our patients, and then also if they have elevated anxiety measures and depression measures, I also work in a multidisciplinary clinic where I have a licensed clinical social worker across the hall. So I can say, okay, hey, colleague of mine, this patient has elevated, patient-reported outcomes in anxiety and depression. And I've talked to the patient about it, and the patient's like, yes, I'm open to talking to a therapist. So I pull Myra in the room, I step out, she does a quick meet and greet. She comes out, we discuss, and she's like, yeah, I've made an appointment. I'm like, great. Do you think we should wait on PT? She's like, no, let's continue PT. We'll do the therapy collectively. Sometimes the patient has deep-rooted psychotherapy needs, so that they start with that, and then they circle back with me later when they're ready. So it depends on the patient's needs, but it's not so separate. It may be just kind of planting a seed for them and saying, you know what, I'm going to serve as a bridge for you because you might need some more support from a licensed mental health professional, but I can do with the basic psychoeducation. All PTs can do the basic psychoeducation. They can say this is your vulva, this is your penis, this is how long it takes to orgasm. So you expecting yourself to last for 2 hours is a little unrealistic. And so we're gonna kind of, manage that expectation so you don't feel so bad about yourself. Do you have
to fight a lot of people on that?
I have in the past. I have in the past. I've had to talk a couple people off ledges, and I'm like, you know, like this is how a 2-hour session can go, but you can't be going the whole 2 hours, you know, like that's just not healthy.
And that's kind of like the goal of your Instagram. It seemed like of just like baseline education, making it something easy to talk about. Like it seems like you're pretty relatable and make it a little bit less taboo, because like you're throwing out like penis, vagina, vulva terms. It's like you're not going to hear that if you go into an ortho clinic typically. But like if you're like, I noticed you get a decent amount of engagement on stuff too. So it's like people are listening, and it might be sort of a safe space too, because they can view your content without, you know, having to go to a therapist, having to go somewhere to talk about it.
Absolutely. And like I said, it's almost a bridge, because I get a lot of DMs. I get a lot of emails. So even though, you know, I try to make it as comfortable as possible, people still don't feel so comfortable publicly putting their stuff out there. And so that's why, you know, I have a separate, part of UC Logic is I do one-on-one sex counseling. So it's not mental health counseling. It's really just what's going on. Okay, here's what I think the education deficits are. I can provide you with those deficits. We'll see how we do over 2 or 3 visits. And then if you feel like, yeah, you know, this is a great, I can work on this and do my thing, or I might say, you know what? I think you're ready to work with a mental health provider. So it's almost like I'm just like a safe bridge, where some people may not feel like they don't need the mental health, but then they realize working with me that they actually do. And then I connect them with who they need to be connected with, or it's simply just an education deficit that I can support them with.
I know, Laura, you can go ahead and introduce yourself too as well, because I don't think we got a full introduction of you, but you are also wanting to do more work in that space as well, correct?
Yeah, so I am a fitness instructor.
Hey.
So my background is in yoga and Pilates. I've also taught bar and spin. I've done a little bit of body work. And in Austin, I've taught at studios that primarily are women who are coming in, a lot of women in childbearing age. And so I've done a lot of work with pregnant women and a lot of work with women post-pregnancy. And so just by kind of occupying that space with them for so long, I've learned a lot. And so I'm at this point, I'm actually at this interesting transition point in my career where I am moving out of a studio space and more into kind of building my own business and doing one-on-one work. And I'm finding there's a huge market for people who just don't understand, what is your pelvic floor? Why is it important? Why would I want to think about it pre-pregnancy, during pregnancy, post-pregnancy? And so actually, like, I have a few clients right now, and they're all kind of in that area that we're tapping into those muscles and that awareness, and it is really interesting.
It's really interesting. People hold a lot of stuff.
For sure.
A lot of stuff, particularly when you're thinking about women and vagina owners and uterus owners. You know, I wrote this article for formerly Thinks Underwear, where I was talking that shame, sexual shame, particularly for women, vagina owners and uterus owners, is very, like, it's a cultural phenomenon, right? It's
for sure
part of our fiber of just the world, not just the US, like worldwide. That area is kind of sort of like keep yourself pristine, right? Keep that, don't get pregnant, you know, don't masturbate. Whereas boys, it's like, okay, masturbate, you're fine, do that, you know, all of that's affirmed. But like for women, it's not. And so there's a whole lot there, because especially when you're asking someone to be aware of their pelvic floor, like they say I have pelvic pain, you know, half the time, you know, my female patients can't really specifically tell me where that pain is, because they're not really tuned in to their genitals.
For sure. Well, I know like I've been working with a few clients, and like one of them on our very first session, we were literally I just explained what her pelvic floor is, how it should feel when you contract it. And we were just doing breathing exercises, like really simple, didn't get into anything too complicated. And she literally said to me, how is this not a requirement for every single woman who wants to get pregnant? And I was like, I don't know. Like it should be.
It should be. It should be. It should be a requirement in all training for anyone who works with bodies.
Yeah, for sure. Absolutely.
Anyone who works with a body should have this education. Because if we all were informed and understood at least the fundamentals, so many people, and we can help them avoid years of heartache and shame. Because any person, particularly women, to find the right provider to help take care of their needs, it's about 7 to 8 years.
Wow.
So that's a long time.
Just to get comfortable finding a provider that.
Just to get someone to address their needs. So I think that we all need to, sorry, I have correcting my, it's 6 years, 6 to 7 years, not 7, 8, 6 to 7 years. But I mean, we all need to get comfortable with this, and it starts with our education programs, whether it's certification programs, whether it's master's programs, doctoral programs. They all like pelvic health should be part of that. If you're doing any type of body work, pelvic health should be included. If you learn about the glutes, you need to learn about the pelvic floor.
Pelvic floor is just as important as glute med.
It is. It is though.
If not more.
Yeah.
It is though. It's a loyal gangster. Your pelvic floor is a loyal gangster.
Yeah.
Is like, if your back ain't right, your pelvic floor is going to compensate or decompensate sometimes. Right? If your hips ain't right, your pelvic floor is going to tell you everything. If your abs are doing too much, pelvic floor is going to react. You know?
Why do you think that? What was the cause of that separation? Why have the two been so separated? Right? Almost is it the Western Eastern philosophies? Is it
I think
our
it's
shame?
It's puritanical BS. You know, I think that it's really about that. Like people just think people don't want to, you know, they don't want to talk about the genital area because it's not appropriate. I'm like, it's totes appropriate. We all poop, we all pee, we all have sexy time in our own way. Everyone's fabulous, right? So why aren't we asking about those basics? You know, if you're working with the neuro population, you need to know about, you need to help them out with sex and pooping and peeing. Pelvic floors.
Well, it's interesting because I've been reading, or I have the book, The Vagina Bible. I'm sure you've heard of it.
Oh,
and
yeah.
I know that, especially in the medical field, that it just wasn't studied until a lot, like more recently.
Yeah.
Again, because of that puritanical, like, oh, it's not like appropriate, or most of the cadavers were men, or they were older women who had, you know, the muscle tone had gotten less, so they just didn't think it was important.
Right.
And so like that like those puritanical beliefs have just seeped so deep into our research that like it's only been fairly recently that we've even known that the pelvic floor even like was something to consider in a.
Absolutely.
It's crazy.
Yeah.
This reminds me like it's just like healthcare was viewed through the male gaze, right?
For so long.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And then when we think about, you know, how a lot of our, particularly in the field of gynecology, a lot of their experiments were performed on Black slaves without anesthesia, right? Without their consent. The C-section fistula repairs, those were perfected on Black women without informed consent. And so we have to understand that there's a lot when it comes to our bodies. There's a lot that goes into under our permission to explore our bodies. Like I said before, there are racial components, there are ethnic components, there are religious components, gender components. So those are very real. Because when I lecture, when I lecture at Michigan, when I lecture at UT, when I do, plenary talks, like I always bring up those pieces. We have to look at it from an intersectional perspective. We can't forget, how we present in the world influences the information we get back to us. And we all have to think about that. Everyone has to think about that. Every human has to think about that and be aware of that.
There's so many parallels between, this, we talk about just our shame that's all centered around sexual health, sexism, and racism. There's just so many parallels of how all of this is all intertwined. And for the folks that therapeutic pain science education is so hot right now and taken in. I'm a biopsychosocial model practitioner. It's like, okay, cool. Are you also incorporating this stuff as well?
Right.
That's so hard and messy to talk about.
It's messy, but it's not. Like I was at the San Diego Pain Summit. I was invited to speak about racism and, and I forget what we titled the talk. It was with Sandy Hilton, Maxie Mitchick, and Mark Milligan. And we wanted to call it pissing people off or something like that, but we were classier about it.
Oh.
And we talked about, microaggressions, macroaggressions, colorism, all of that. And it was at a pain conference. And it was, I feel like it was well received, but it was really exhausting and hard because there are a lot of emotions wrapped around recognizing our mutually inherited advantages and disadvantages. And recognizing that our pain is not a uniform experience. We all know intellectually it's a unique, individualized experience, but then we really have to understand how systems of oppression can influence one's experience of pain, but then also how one addresses an individual's experience of pain. And that requires internal work that isn't sexy, and you can't throw it into an academic software, and you can't necessarily quantify it really well with, p-values isn't that great, there's lots of ways that, we want to fight against that because it's hard to make it super tangible, but it's there. And mixed words about that stuff.
So is healthcare getting better regarding that now that we're having these conferences and you're speaking at more conferences now? Hopefully you're not going to shoot this down like my other question.
Look, okay.
You can shoot it down. It's okay. It's fine.
I've been speaking about this for 6 years. You have no idea how many talks I've given on this. Tons. And I'm very happy that their ears are open and their eyes are open. So I hope that in the next, few years, we'll start to see some shifts and people get comfortable with being uncomfortable and then say, you know what? I need to rethink this. I need to rethink everything and approach it from a different perspective. So do I think healthcare is getting better as a whole? Well, we have to address the systems of oppression for healthcare to get better, which means we have to start at home. We have to be willing to give up our power. We have to be willing to give up our social capital. We have to be willing to say we're wrong. I'm wrong all the time. except when I'm not wrong. So I'm not wrong about this. I'm just saying.
Yep. Ooh, Trace, at the VA, do you get into any pelvic or sexual health? Because at the VA, I know you see a lot of things coming at you.
There's a lot of referrals for it, and prior to, I'd say probably the last 2 years, they were taking on the pelvic floor stuff, but no one was a pelvic floor therapist. It was a lot of, here's your Kegel home exercise program. And since I've been there, whenever I'm screening consults, I forward it out to community care. And it's like, this is a specialty we don't offer in this facility. Because I've gotten 2 pelvic floor cases, 1 male, 1 female, neither of which I felt I could help. The female, I thought enough through the subjective that she was comfortable talking to me about it. She knew why she was there. It seemed sort of like stress incontinence. So I went with, here's what I would do, but I'm going to refer you to a physical therapist that specializes in this, because this is something we can handle. It's just not my specialty. There's a reason people go into this. That is not what I do. Here is baseline. It probably isn't going to hurt you from the way you're describing your case to do this. If it starts to flare anything up, stop and wait till you get to the specialist. So I very much take the approach of, I'm fairly open with all of my patients if they present with something, because at the VA, it's like, I'll have people that say, I've had headaches for 20 years. Well, what happened for your headache? Well, a bomb went off by my head. It's like, well, I don't know how to deal with that. Like, well, what happened? How did you start developing these issues? So far, it's been, pregnancy, or I've just gotten older and this has happened. But there are a lot of veterans with military sexual trauma from being a POW or something like that. I haven't had to have that conversation. It's one I'm not comfortable with. And I told my boss that. It's like, this is not, there's a reason there are specialists in this. I am not one of them, and I'm not going to see them. Like, I will send them to community care. So it's been pretty well received by our management too, of like, this isn't just like, oh, you need to see a PT. It's like, oh, you need to see a specialist. Like, this isn't just a thing that we do. So
absolutely. And I think what's really unfortunate, I think, is that, it's hard to get access. I'm at a state institution, but it's still difficult to access me because we take mostly internal referrals, because there's so few of us. And I'm trying to expand that, but, recruiting a pelvic health PT is challenging, because like once somebody finds a place they love and they stay there. And so it's having to kind of do that work, but then also building the structure to kind of make sure that people thrive and grow. And I totally hear what you're saying, because you're like, there's a lot of trauma that's wrapped up in, what these patients are coming to you with. And you're like, you know what? I can help you with this fundamental piece, but I'm going to send you on your way here, and then finding that, like, what's even trickier is that not all pelvic PTs have any training in like trauma-informed care.
Yeah. And that was another thing that I've learned is like the VA, just from talking with like Jared and Tyler, like the VA population, that's not normal outpatient ortho. So I can only imagine normal outpatient pelvic health, where you've seen a lot of postpartum, and then it comes in with, POW trauma, you're dealing with all of that. It's like, that's a whole other can of worms that you have to know how to address, because otherwise you're not serving that patient well. So it's tricky, because we don't have, there's very few pelvic floor PTs that I know in the VA system, because it's mostly like the VA and the military services a whole is mostly male dominated. So it's been here recently. Probably the last 20 years, where women's health has had like their own clinic. They've developed like their own programs, but it's still kind of up and coming. So they're getting there, but it's, like I said, some of my colleagues have said for the last 20 years, it's been, here's your Kegel home exercise program. There you go. You've gotten pelvic floor physical therapy. And it's like, that's not what it is anymore. There's a lot more out there.
Absolutely.
I know it's that ego thing too. I know Tyler and I, we used to work at the same clinic, and one of the we're talking to one of the residency directors, and I mentioned like, hey, I had a client come in, and it was a pelvic health referral, and our clinic didn't offer that. Do you know any providers in the area? This is before I knew you and Sullivan and Hands On. And his response was like, oh, anybody, you know, that has a residency training, you should be able to handle that. And I was like, I don't think that's the right answer. I don't think that was correct. I'm not gonna talk to you anymore. And I think Tyler knows who I'm talking about. Tyler, anything you want to add from things that you've seen in ortho right now?
No, I just want to confirm that was a real thing, and there are people out there that think that way, and I don't know.
Yeah. No, it's funny. I mean, I'm residency trained, but I don't think that I don't believe that if we were going to judge PTs by their residency training, that's a sad state to to be in. I think that, I look for a healthcare provider that is responsive and thoughtful, and that's who I refer my patients to, and period. I mean, and and again, even in most spaces that I've been in the pelvic PT world, everyone's pretty supportive. I think it's just a matter of, but we're all spread out, right? We're all spread out, and it's hard to have communities in some places because, like you have like large private practice systems, and you have like, public health systems, and it's very, very tricky to get that community down. So I think a lot of us, we go to like the combined section meetings and those conferences to kind of be like, hey, what's down? But I think that's the one weakness that I can say that I've, for myself, since I moved here to Austin 3 years ago, is that I need to kind of, spread my wings more in terms of like really getting to know more people. Like I know Janice Mitchell from my pelvic floor muscles, and she's amazing. But I think that's been a challenge. But I also know from my personal development, I came here to UT to be on faculty in a med school to change how they train their OB-GYN residents in terms of pelvic health, and to develop a program and build a program for pelvic floor physical therapy, in a brand new medical system. So that was my focus the past few years. But I think, every season changes. So now my next season, or the next step, would be establishing community.
It's needed for sure.
Absolutely.
What was your journey like, transitioning from growing up in a Catholic religious household to becoming more of an open-minded person that's able to maybe accept same-sex marriage and breaking down those standards that you grew up with?
Well, I must correct. My mom was very conservative, yet very liberal. So I think, she was Catholic, but a scientist first. And so everything needed to make sense from a scientific perspective from her end, even though she's a devout Catholic. But I think the core value in my home was decency and humanity. And that was a core value. And I also, I was very lucky in that my parents allowed my sister and I to go to an all-girl prep school where we had nuns on campus. And I know that sounds ridiculous as when you're in high school, but it was a wonderful, for me as an individual, I love that experience because, it was centered on service and community. Even though we were wild and crazy Catholic schoolgirls, we were still, that was the value. And, I think I had an active mother who really was committed to making sure her kids contributed to the world in some capacity. My sister is a criminal defense attorney, and, she believes in justice for all, and she does everything she can to do that. And I try to affirm people by acknowledging their identities and making sure that they don't feel shame in who they are and wanting more for themselves, whether that's their sexuality or just who they are as humans. But I think I've also struggled growing up in mostly white spaces and being a Black woman. And, you know, I've gone through the phases of internalized racism. You know, like I did a webinar earlier this week talking about anti-racism, and I said, you know, growing up, I was told I have to be twice as good. I have to be 3 times as good. And I know that my parents were trying to gas me up, but like that tells a kid very clearly you're not as good. So you have to work just as hard, or not just as hard, like way harder to get the same thing. And so, you know, I mean, I remember thinking to myself, like, I'm going to be a good Black kid and I'm going to make people forget that I'm Black, which is just heartbreaking, right? And thank God, like, you know, like, I grew out of that, like, you know, but it was a real struggle to kind of have your identity. And I had, like, I mean, my house was basically like United Nations, you know, my parents had people from all over the world coming in. It was also like little Nigeria. So I was around all, you know, but I wasn't around that during the day. You know, it was in a different society, a different world, you know, from 7 a.m. to 8 o'clock.
It was Dallas. It's a different world.
It's Dallas, you know? So, you know, and it's Dallas proper, right? So, like, it's a whole other beast out there. You know, it's hard out there in those streets. And, I think, you know, and I think that's partially why I so desperately like wanted to get out. I wanted something a little different from my little bubble. And I ran towards it, not away. I ran towards something, not away from anything.
Oh, that's awesome. And sorry, man. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'll just kind of give another one with that is growing up in those white spaces. And you had an Instagram post about this recently. Is there anything that you, any action steps and some immediate steps that those individuals in those white areas that you feel like need to happen first and foremost to get the ball rolling more in that direction? Anything that comes to mind?
Yeah, I mean, I've said this before, but like fragility is not bad. Like when people hear white fragility, they're like, I'm weak. And it's like, no, you just aren't weathered to what Black people have to deal with all the time. And learning and being aware, when I talked about inherited advantage and disadvantages, it's just white fragility means that your humanity is never questioned. And it's very uncomfortable to look at someone else who's equally human and their humanity is always questioned, fundamentally, in every system. And so I want people to kind of embrace like that fragile part. And people say, man, I'm exhausted. It's exhausting. Yeah, it's okay to be exhausted. You're not used to this. I might as well be the like seasoned marathon runner. You know, I've been doing this, like I do 26.2 miles every week, and you're a couch potato. You know, you just gotta train up, homie. Suit up.
Yeah, it's training. It's like hitting people over the head, especially in the PT community. I think they're starting to get that this is graded exposure. It's
graded exposure. It's like, baby, you're not going to be an expert in a week? Oh, please. I am, like I said before, I'm a grown-ass woman. I've been doing this since, like, the minute I came out of my mom's holy place, okay? And I've been watching white people my entire life. It is part of my survival to understand you all. It is not part of your survival to understand me and my experience. And now you are starting to realize, oh damn. And so I think like the action steps is to like right now you feel like you're drinking from a fire hose, you are. Pace yourself. You know, right now everyone's like, don't ask Black people to help. And I think it's like, we know that is in everyone's best interest to help you, but we just need a minute to just like recover from the trauma. Sorry, my light. And then we'll be fine and we'll help you out. But I think like the first piece is like being okay with being fragile. Really look at multiple sources and recommendations on like how you learn best. Like just think of it as self-improvement. How do I learn best? I personally love documentaries, right? So like if I'm a person that like loves to learn by like visual, then like focus on that visual stuff. Like go back to what you like. How do you learn best? Do you like podcasts? And find all the dopest podcasts you can find. If you're a reader, there are a ton of books that you can read, right? And I mean, and the thing is, everyone's like, well, what did you think of this book? I'm like, I haven't read it. I already know this. I live this. They're just smart enough to put it on paper and they make a shit ton of money. Excuse my language. You know?
Oh, yes. Yes.
You know, like I live this. I live this. Like, you know, so like, I mean, and I'm not saying I don't read. Of course, I've read a lot of books. Like I think there's a book that no one is mentioning. It's called Savage Inequalities by Jonathan Kozol. And it is excellent. And it talks about the education system. So I think anyone in any form of education should read that book. It's eye-opening, it's sobering. I read it in PT school and it really informed a lot of what I do. And you know, I think I think people just need to kind of design your own plan and just know that it's not a side hustle what you're doing. This is a life hustle. This is a life hustle. You know, and of course, you know, I'm like seasoned in like lowering people in warm bath water about their nonsense. Like I'm fine with that. I'm going on vacation next week. I'm going to recharge, but I'll be back with full energy. But like, you know, but like understand that like it takes a lot out of us to live this life. And then it takes a lot out of us to teach y'all, even though we've been telling you for like ever. And so many people have died in this effort. Oh, and one thing, please watch I Am Not Your Negro, please. That's just like one of, like next to 13th, I feel like that is the documentary that everyone should be watching.
Like anything about Baldwin is just.
Oh my goodness.
Just so good.
It was just a treasure to the world.
The metaphors you're dropping too, I'm loving them so much. The metaphors have been so good.
I'm I have my cocktail.
There we go.
A little freer.
This is an extended bourbon tale.
This is an yes, queen, yes. This is an extended bourbon tales.
That's awesome. How'd you come up with that name? Was that just come?
You know, I'm kind of in love with bourbon, or my colleague Teresa calls it brown water. And depending on the day, she'll be like, "You getting some brown water tonight?" And I'm like, "Absolutely, my queen." I love bourbon, and I would talk with my friends about sexy time all the time. And I just thought, well, I didn't want to make it so clinical. Like everyone, like I looked up in social media and I was like, God, people talk about sex. It's like either like really like in your face, which I know is intimidating for most people. And I was like, or it's like too clinical. So I was like, well, bourbon tales, like most people like a bev, even if it's a non-alcoholic bev. And if I drink tales and make it casual, they'll feel more comfortable.
Yeah.
You know, and every answer I have is evidence-based. It's not, I mean, there are a few questions where it's like just like life experience and just me being a human, but a lot of the answers I give are based on like, you know, true academic rigor. So it's not just like, well, I just figured this out. Like I really have to prepare and think about it.
Yeah. It's from a doctor. These are doctor level bourbon tales.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. You know, I think what's funny, I love getting questions about, you know, relationships, and like how you navigate a partner. I mean, most of it is, how do I navigate my partner's quirks? And it's really interesting how, like, what I've learned over the past almost 3.5 years of doing, you know, UC Logic is that, you know, everyone comes with their own sexual footprint. And we don't always understand them, especially going into a relationship. And for some people, it's a natural, like, you know, fusion. And for others, they struggle. And that struggle doesn't necessarily mean that you're not, you know, equally yoked. It just means that, like, there's different ways that you express and experience your sexuality, and different comfort levels. And sometimes people need a little help with that. And so I think people just don't give themselves enough grace, you know, and kind of just be a little humble and be like, you know, I don't know how to do this. I don't understand. I don't know the anatomy very well. Or you know, I thought we're supposed to have simultaneous orgasms. We're not supposed to have simultaneous orgasms, like, you know, like things like that. And so, where I'm not supposed to last 2 hours straight, like I can do like my 10 minutes. Of, like,
I told you that in confidence, you see.
Their social security is, I'm just kidding.
Well, we're coming up on our hour. I have one more question. Does anybody else have a question? Anything else to get out? Good. Excuse me. So this anti-racism movement momentum is feeling pretty strong. A lot is happening. A lot of protests. Some people are comparing it to the civil rights movement of the 60s. I don't know if that's a fair comparison. Does this feel like true change is on the way? How do you feel about this momentum that's coming up?
I am not the person to ask because I am very young. I think that the people that ask are the people who were in the fight in the 60s, and that would be Angela Davis, the Al Sharptons, Jesse Jacksons, the Gloria Steinems. And I know Angela Davis did make a statement, and she said, this feels different. This feels like progress. She's never seen this worldwide, you know, I mean, she's never seen it like this. And I actually am hopeful, because I will say this, never in my lifetime has anyone really asked me about racism in a real, I want to learn way. I want to be better way. This is the first time my experience and knowledge is actually sought out after in a way where people want to better themselves. And the collective strength of the Black community calling people out in ways that honor who they are as individuals, I'm just so proud of us. And I hope that things move forward. I will continue to do what I do, you know, and I will continue to elevate my game. I will continue to strive for excellence, as I'm sure everyone is going to try and do.
Thank you, UC. We appreciate your excellence. We love it. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. I'm so happy to be here with you all.
We're honored. Hey, how can people reach you? Would you mind?
Yes. You can check me out on my website, www.uclogic.com. You can email me at info@uclogic, or you can follow me on Instagram, Facebook, or Twitter, and soon to be TikTok once I figure out how to do that.
Yes.
At UCLogic.
You're gonna be huge on TikTok. It's gonna be so much fun.
I don't know, man. I mean, I am I do dance with reckless abandon, but
Yes.
it's literally reckless abandon. So how it goes.
That's what the people want.
I mean, we'll see.
Thank you so much, UC.
Thank you.
Have a good rest of your evening.